A deal with China on climate change, President Obama weighs in on net neutrality, and a startling revelation in Obamacare. I'm Taylor Kinsler, and this is The Square Circle. Hello and welcome to the Square Circle. Thanks for staying tuned. We got a late start tonight. I'm your host, Taylor Kinsler. Joining us today are Nick Brana of socioevolve.com, political consultant Marcio Coimbra, and Al Matei of topofthecircle.com. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. So we have big news this week on climate change. President Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to limit their country's carbon emissions. Now, many have failed the agreement as a breakthrough, but some in Congress worry that it would hurt the U.S. economy for no discernible effect on the climate. Now, Nick, how is this a big deal, and how much do you trust that Washington and Beijing will make good on their promises?
It is an important deal because it marks China's greater cooperation in this area, which is really what's been kind of the impasse in climate negotiations for more than a decade since the Kyoto Protocol. It's been the fact that developing countries, the biggest ones in particular China and India, have said, well, you know, you in the developed world were able to reach this level of development by polluting the environment to an incredible degree. You know, for many years it was after World War II, it was the United States for most of that period that was the biggest greenhouse gas emitter. So they said, you know, it's unfair now for you to try to put restrictions on our ability to, you know, to simply pursue ruthless, you know, economic growth. And during the Bush administration, you know, Bush didn't really want to do anything about climate change. So he said, okay, you know, so what? I'll say that we won't do anything until developing countries don't want to do it, you know, until they say something. The developing countries will say they don't want to do it, you know, because it's unfair, you know, and we'll reach this impasse that really we're all happy to have because none of us really want to do anything. Now with this agreement, it is heartening. In this agreement, China promised to cap its emissions at when it reaches 2030 at those levels. The U.S. agreed to cut emissions by 26 to 28% by 2025. But in my mind, there are three pitfalls. First, it isn't binding. You know, that's the biggest problem. It's a verbal agreement. It's not written. And second, the deal spans multiple administrations. Those kinds of deals are so flimsy, they almost never remain. And thirdly, even if it were enforced, it's nowhere near as powerful as what we need to actually reverse the worst effects, the 4 and 5 degree warming.
Anyone want to weigh in?
Well, let's not pussyfoot around here. This is about coal. China is one of the world's worst polluters when it comes to coal-fired power plants. And if you ever have the, well, I'd have to say it, misfortune of visiting Mongolia, you'd feel the effects in your lungs and the number of times you have to go to the laundry, etc. It is off the chart bad, the pollution in parts of Mongolia, especially that are up above the temperature inversions near coal-fired power plants, where people have anywhere from 50 to 200 times the amount of particulate that is considered safe. If you know people that have black lung disease in coal mines have a certain amount of safety involved in terms of their of what they have to breathe, Mongolians have no such protections. I'm a little bit worried about the long-term protocols, because if you're going to lock in what you're going to do at the year 2030, is that right?
Yeah, for China.
They can burn as much coal as they want. They can dig out whole mountains like what they're doing. They can employ pretty much indentured servitude as much as they want in order to be able to burn as much coal as they feel as though they need to in order to be able to to build things, to be able to manufacture, to run their plants. And I think overall it's weak, but in terms of a verbal agreement, it's not a treaty. But given what the climate in Washington, you could have a treaty out there for moms and apple pie, and nobody would agree on it.
Kind of like the Kyoto Protocol, which was never ratified by Congress. So.
It was never ratified, and what we see here, that's there's plenty of room to step back. And I think that what is going to happen in the future, we don't know with the next administrations and everything, but a verbal agreement looks like to me like it's just politics. They're just making their scene. They're at the stage. They're saying what they're supposed to say, but practically it's not going to happen anything. Nothing is going to change. We're not going to see any kind of real commitments, not real laws. It's not binding, like you said. So a long-term protocol, verbal, which means as much as nothing. That's how I see it.
I mean, this is
empty.
This is public relations.
Yeah.
In my mind, mostly. It's really unfortunate,
It's very unfortunate.
It does signal the fact that China's more willing to, come to the table with these kinds of negotiations, which gets at that ultimate impasse that underlies global climate negotiation, and that's the most heartening thing that came out of it.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see if the verbal agreement will actually come to fruition. Now, I'd like to remind our viewers at home that you can submit your questions to our website at www.publicsquare.net, and we'll answer as many as we can during the show. Now we're going to move on. Earlier this week, President Obama made a surprise move by weighing in on the contentious issue of net neutrality. The president urged the Federal Communications Commission to regulate internet service providers as telecommunications companies, and this would subject them to government regulation, including the so-called net neutrality rule. But critics of the rule say that it would stifle innovation and subject the internet to heavy-handed government bureaucracy. Now, Al, what do you make of this?
What you're starting to see, interestingly enough, is you're starting to see the counter-arguments to some of the effects of the 2014 D.C. court ruling, which said that companies could go non-neutral in the ways that they purchase, provide internet services. You actually have internet service providers running commercials saying that we have fast internet in terms of upload and download, and our competitors do not. And what that's called in terms of what's been going on, some call it throttling. Although that's been more used for mobile phone usage for high volume users. But what net neutrality, at least this is from what I'm seeing in terms of this particular executive order by the president to tell the FCC to create rules which would prohibit throttling, to prohibit what's called prioritization. In other words, if you're a Google service provider, you cannot provide fast streaming to YouTube, but not to Vimeo or Dailymotion or any other types of providers. And it would also prohibit blocking. And I'm all for net neutrality in situations like this. Yes, I understand that there are groups that are trying to wall off certain portions of the internet for themselves. But the internet, I believe, it's kind of interesting that Adam Smith's invisible hand is kind of working to try and keep the internet as free and unfettered as it was in the wild, wild west days of the mid-1990s.
Yeah, in my opinion, the internet is the greatest democratizing tool since the invention of the printing press in 1450 by Gutenberg. By eroding the ability of a certain minority, a certain elite in a society to control the information which reaches us, by giving people unfettered choice and access to information directly, it erodes and elite's ability to control a narrative, to create a narrative in a society, okay, that can be used to mislead people, and that frequently is in all societies. So it's an incredibly empowering invention, you know, and to me this is a very black and white conflict here. It is, do you want the telecoms to be able to essentially break up, segregate the internet, censor content? Do we want the telecoms telling us what it is that it is appropriate for us to see, what isn't, what they would what they don't want us seeing? But if we allow them to do this, I think we're going to see a great kind of dying off of the creativity and the diversity of the internet, because a lot of the smaller websites, and that goes for independent news sites too, they're not going to be able to pay the additional fees to compete with the telecom's own news agency, or say the telecom makes an agreement with CBS or whatever, okay, and this is the kind of thing you're going to begin to see. And so then the agreement states that the telecom essentially charges everybody else in the news business at a higher rate to give CBS a monopoly within their business. You know, so you're just going to see this total destruction of this free, open, creative internet, you know, that you saw that was born in the 90s, and that was wonderful. This is setting the precedent for decades to come, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the internet is the most wonderful thing that we've seen in the last centuries, and it's changing the way we see things, and it's changing politics all over the world. We could see it during the Arab Spring, during the protests in Brazil, during the protests everywhere in the world. People are using social media, people are spreading their news, people are reading now their timeline as newspapers, and newspapers are dying. So I think that in this case here, what I wrote something that seems to me like specific interests are doing well by the current system, and they want to maintain the status quo via government regulations. So, and I have problems with regulations when we have regulations that are affecting something that is free. So if we're creating rules and we never know, the people who are creating the rules are attached to some interests, and they will ever be. So even if they are elected or not, if they are appointed by the president or by anybody. So we should be really careful with these controls and the rules and the regulations on something that's supposed to be free and works and was developed as something free, and it should be free and should stay free. So that's the main concern.
I think it's important to put this into context too by saying that 90% of the media that we receive today, that includes newspapers, radio, TV, movie studios, print, 90% of that is owned by 6 companies in the United States. 90%. Okay, that means that 90% of what we see, hear, read passes through a corporate filter before it ever reaches our ears.
Exactly.
You know, and they have an interest. They're not independent in this. These corporations that own, say, like Viacom, CBS, Rupert Murdoch's company, all of these corporations own their media service as just one part of a huge conglomerate. You know, like GE, for example, is also one of those 6 companies. They own all these defense contracting firms. That means they have an interest. Okay, they own MSNBC. They have an interest in what they report. You know, the internet is our response to that. It's a way of accessing information without having passed through that filter. And that's part of the reason, in my opinion, that this is so important, for certain people in society, for a certain ruling class in society, to try to limit this, to try to place restrictions upon this. One other thing that I'll say, two of the corporations who are lobbying the hardest to destroy net neutrality are Time Warner and Comcast. These are the 2 largest ISPs already. They're trying to merge. If they successfully merge, they'll have 60% market share in one company. That's not capitalism. That's not free market. That's just insane.
And then we see there are conglomerates that are too big to fail after that, right?
Right. So do we want more than half of our internet market controlled by one company that decides, eventually what we see, what to restrict access to, who gets a fast lane, who gets a slow lane, who has to pay exorbitant fees.
And what is interesting is that their power, they grow not in a free market. They grow because they know how to lobby, they know how to have regulations, they know how to create regulations,
Absolutely.
they know how to operate in Washington.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that they are very effective competitors in an open market. No, it means they have good lobbyists,
Exactly.
and they're doing a hell of a good job here in DC.
Now, finally, there was a major revelation about Obamacare this week. A video emerged of MIT professor Jonathan Gruber, one of the principal architects of the law, saying that Obamacare was deliberately designed to confuse the American people, whom he called stupid. Gruber later said he regretted those remarks, but opponents of the law seized on them, saying that they provided what they've been saying about Obamacare since the beginning. Now, Marcio, do Gruber's remarks kind of fit the definition of a gaffe, saying that the truth is kind of coming at an inopportune time?
Yeah, it was a gaffe, but it is politics. So when somebody that was involved in the policy makes a comment like that, of course the other side's going to pick that and it's going to make a big scene out of it. But here in Washington, we know how politics works, and that's how politics works. And that's it. He was just clear about how things work. And we know how the laws are passed, how the laws are made, how the laws are discussed, and the lawmakers, we know what they think about what the public thinks. I mean, they get elected. Right? There are focus groups on elections. You know, you work with that. I work with that. We know how the public is going to react. And when we propose a law at a certain time in an administration, we know that. We know what's going to be the response of the public, what do we have to say. And I mean, he just came clear about it. And I mean, he didn't say that he was against the policy, that the policy was a failure. It's about implementation, about how you get the message, how politics is made. People like to watch House of Cards, but they don't like to hear these comments. Mm-hmm. They don't know how they think it's bad when people say the truth about how politics is done, but then they buy Netflix and watch House of Cards and get entertained, right?
Well, the way I see it, there's certain people who want it both ways when it comes to the way that these remarks were interpreted. Let me just read you a little bit of what he said in terms of what Mr. Gruber actually said. He said, "This bill was written in a tortured way to make sure that the Congressional Budget Office did not score the mandate, that is to say, the individual mandate for a person to be able to purchase your insurance as taxes. If CBO scores the mandate at taxes, the bill dies. So it was written to do that." It was an unvarnished moment by Gruber that was found by a political insider named Rich Weinstein, who has found a number of clips which have been used to discredit the ADA over the last few years. And it's going to be interesting to see whether this is going to give any impetus to another repeal and replace movement. If so, we're going to be at what attempt number 42 in the House to try and defund Obama. It's above 50 now. Yeah. I'm not sure what's going to happen because even if you postpone this vote until the next Congress, you still don't have a veto-proof majority. You can pass it as many times as you want, but it ain't going to get signed.
There was a legitimate point behind what he was saying, in my opinion, and it's in fact the same point that exists behind our two other topics, climate change and net neutrality. And it's that possibility in Washington means what is in the benefit of corporate interests. That is the realm of possibility in Washington. That's why, and these political interests that are a function of that. That's why you had this tortured process that Gruber describes to create this. Whereas in Massachusetts, you got a better version of this because it simply wasn't. You didn't have people threatening, to campaign on these kinds of things. You didn't have this aspect of like a tax increase, being just totally impossible to pass, in any way at all.
But we're going to move on to some questions from our viewers. So our first question is from Lynette Henderson, and she said, even if the subsidy language in Obamacare is just a typo, actually we're going to stay in the Obamacare topic then, can't it be fixed with simple legislation? I think that we've talked about this a little bit, but anybody want to take a stab at it?
I'm not sure it's going to be regulation. I don't think it's going to be legislation. I think it's going to be regulation because, you've got two houses of Congress who are going to be dead set against the president, and they're probably going to have less legislation in in the upcoming Congress than they did in this one. But the great thing about being in the executive branch, you can execute laws, you can pass rules and regulations, and in the absence of leadership by the Congress in this stead, it's kind of amazing how much power a president does have in terms of being able to execute the laws of the land, or in some cases not.
The short answer is yes, I think, to the question. It could be fixed. Technically, could it be done? Yes, but that's not what determines political happenings in Washington. It could be done very easily. It could be done, tomorrow. But what determines politics in Washington is political possibility, and that's something completely different. Because again, it's viewed through this corporate perspective, through this corporate lens of seeing everything. So now that Republicans are going to control Congress, there's just no hope of that.
All right, well, our next question is from Emilio Aguiar, and he wants to know who's more likely to engage on the climate change deal. Is it going to be the U.S. or China?
Who's more likely to engage? Neither one is both of them are the largest impediments. Between the two of them, they emit 40% of the pollution of the greenhouse gas pollution right now. So I really think that we're going to get some kind of variation of the impasse that has existed now. That's why this was somewhat hopeful to me, because this is a developing nation trying to break this impasse, taking a step, but because the United States is a country that's managed on the principle of corporate profitability for the few as opposed to the benefits of the many, like every other issue we've been talking about. I find it unlikely.
I find that the U.S. has much more possibility to do that, just because of one point, is democracy. Here you have precious groups, you have voices for different parts of the society. People talk, people organize themselves, they have a voice. And in China, you don't see that. You see just what the government, what's their policy, what they're going to do. And so that's why I think that America is most likely to engage in any kind of discussions in the future.
Well, let's wait a week, because this whole thing with U.S. and China was done as part of the APEC conference. Next week in Australia is the G20, and in the G20, you not only have the 20 largest democracies, but you're going to have Brazil, you're going to have India, you're going to have China, you're going to have all the BRIC countries in one place with the United States, and maybe a communique will come out about climate change from there. Maybe not. It's one of the things that's going to slowly evolve. Maybe this was the one thing that starts the ball rolling. We're not sure.
Something that's also heartening is that China is trying to become a leader in renewable energy production, in the technology, in solar panels in particular.
Oh, they're thinking 70 years ahead. We cannot think 7.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
We can't think 7 days ahead.
Germany's doing the same thing, with solar panels. And, I've got to say, the potential that we're squandering here. We have one of the greatest wind corridors in the world in the Midwest, around Texas and Arkansas.
Chicago.
A man called T. Boone Pickens came out with a plan, to build a ton of a massive wind farm there. Would have been an improvement. And we have the same thing in New Mexico and Arizona, that provides the same potential for as a solar farm, for the energy, So we have huge potential,
Yeah.
It's not, again, it's not because of the technical possibility, it's political possibility.
Yeah, because Pickens, instead of spending money on the farm, he spent it on the Oklahoma State football team.
All right, well, now it's time for our most underreported story of the week. Who would like to start us off?
Okay, may as well. In Chesterfield, Missouri this past week, there was a bit of a discussion online. Okay, it was not just a little bit of discussion. This developed 1 million shares on Facebook. A school group of developmentally disabled kids went to a local shopping mall, and as sometimes they'll go to various stores, but they were not allowed to go into a Bath and Body Works store. Now, of course, you can spin this in any one of several different ways. Why, in terms of the educational component for developmentally disabled students, do you want to bring kids to a mall? What is the good in that? Or you can think of the heartless corporate entity that will not allow developmentally disabled kids to visit your store. But what I thought the most underreported aspect of this story, both online and in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was the reason that the store gave. They said that the reason they didn't want this small group of kids to come into the store is that the number of kids coming into the store would count against the number of people coming into the store through sensors in the floor and the walls of the store, which would, because the kids wouldn't necessarily, they would probably not buy anything in the store, it would count against the sales percentage of the day. Now, what kind of company would spy on your consumers, count the number of people coming in, and then hold the store employees responsible if they weren't able to sell enough product?
Right.
It's not a company I want to work for.
Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I've been saying for months, including right here on Square Circle, that the war in Syria was not about ISIS. It was never about ISIS to begin with. This has always been about deposing Bashar al-Assad. That's always been Obama's intention. And that he would do it after the midterms. And in 2013, 1 year ago, this shows how short the public memory is. 1 year ago, it was explicit. We were going over there because of an alleged chemical attack that turned out not to be true. It turned out to be being committed by the rebels. We were going there to remove him from power. Now, 3 days after the midterms, Obama quietly doubled on, Friday afternoon, doubled the number of troops in Iraq. This itself is only a precursor to what's coming with Syria. In my opinion, it's important to know that Syria's military is not like Libya, it's not like Afghanistan, it's not even like Iraq. This is a real military supplied by another global superpower, supplied by Russia. So this is a serious Air Force, it's a serious military, it's a very loyal force. It's not like the 350,000 soldiers in Iraq, under the al-Maliki government who just collapsed in the face of a few thousand, ISIS fighters. Defeating regime-changing Assad is going to take ground troops, and it's going to take American ground troops. The United States is going to deploy ground troops. They'll probably wait till next year when Republicans are in Congress so that they can share the blame, for this, because this is another open-ended crisis. We're going to create another failed state in the Middle East, just like we did with Iraq, just like we did with Libya, just like we did with Afghanistan. So the escalation of this war is inevitable. The reason Turkey hasn't joined the coalition is because they've been precisely waiting for that. They've been waiting for the U.S. to join on board and explicitly go against just defeating Assad, because that's always been the real goal. There's geopolitical energy interest, huge trillions of dollars worth of geopolitical energy interest in who controls Syria and who can pass pipelines through that country that go to the second largest market in the world, Western Europe. There is a plan between Iran, Iraq, and Syria to pass a pipeline that is going to provide Iranian energy to Western Europe. There's a competing plan that's going to provide UAE and Qatari gas from the same North Pars gas field that's in the Persian Gulf. You know, so who controls Syria geopolitically is going to determine who makes trillions of dollars worth of oil revenue and who has leverage, political leverage, over Western Europe, just like Russia does today. That's what this war is really about. It's always been about opposing Assad. Wesley Clark said it back in 2001, in fact. And Paul Wolfowitz was talking about it since 1991, about regime change in Syria. You know, so that's what we're going to see.
Okay. Last but not least.
It's about politics and the UK. We have the latest polls there now that shows that the Conservatives are with 31%, the Labour 29%, the UKIP, the Nationalists 14%, and Liberal Democrats just with 8%. Of course, we have a different system in UK. We have district system, which is kind of similar we have in the United States. So this may not be very accurate to what's going to happen. But if this is confirmed, probably we're not going to have a new government with David Cameron, with the Lib Dems in a second term. Probably we're going to face, because of the nationalists, we can face a government. There's going to be a coalition between Conservatives and Labour, which is something amazing. But probably it's going to be the only way out in the English politics to not let the nationalists gain more power. And so we're going to see England taking the same road as Germany. I mean, a coalition between the two big parties that are going to be, they're going to need to find a way, a way at the middle of the road for their policies, and they're going to have to work together to avoid nationalism. And that's probably going to happen in the UK in 2015.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and thank you to the viewers at home for tuning in. We'll see you next week.